Hi everybody, Sandra here from Create in Spain. Now today I'm doing another one of my hints and tips videos. You might want to watch this if you're thinking of buying a few stocking fillers, for example, for someone, or you're looking to expand your crafty repertoire. You might like to see what I've got that you may think is worthwhile buying. Or just pick up hints and tips of how to use the products you already have and perhaps are not making the most of. But first of all, I wanted to show you, I did do a video on this a little while ago, what I made to put my 12-inch vinyl pieces in. Ta-da! Okay, it's a bit difficult to show you on camera, but I wanted some shelf storage that was big enough for 12-inch vinyl because my shelves aren't quite that deep and you don't want to leave it unsupported. So I have in here a packet of Arteza vinyls, and there we go, there's my Arteza. I've got an opened packet on the top of that. I've got more room in there if I need to. And you'll notice on here I have left a lid. This was not by accident, this is quite on purpose, because I figured I might want to put something else on the top, for example, my stencil pack, or maybe a different sort of vinyl. I can easily store it and it's not going to fall off. Or if I'm using this and this is on my desk, I can put supplies on top of it and they're not going to fall off. So I could put my scissors on there, a few pens and rulers and all that sort of stuff, and it will be contained all in one spot. So that is my storage. Now if you're wondering what it's made of foam core. It's 5mm in depth, and it's strong enough to do a pretty good job of this sort of storage. And I've also made an A2 or A3, I forget which the size is, the double A4, which is A3, I think, yeah. I also made one of those for my larger paper pads. But what I wanted to make sure that you understand, because it really is important if you're trying to do this and make it neat, is that my secret for making these is actually pins. Yeah, dressmaking pins. Because when you make this kind of thing, you need to use hot glue basically, because that's the only thing that's going to glue it together quick enough for you to actually make something three-dimensional. But hot glue, as you know, the other side effect of hot glue is that it's so fast, you have to work pretty fast. And it isn't always that easy to do, especially if you only have one pair of hands, you don't have anyone helping you. So what I found after making my first box and finding it quite difficult to manage, that the easiest way of doing this is to set everything where you want it to be by using pins. So for example, on this side here, I would put a pin right the way through the wall into that layer to hold it in place. It works really, really well. So on this one, I got my joins where I wanted them to be, on the front, on the back, on the sides, on the top, everywhere was where I actually intended it to get joined. So that is how to cope with it. It makes it so much easier. You just wouldn't believe it. If you want to do any creative lettering, then I suggest you have a look at these Creative Lettering Colour Manuscript pens. They are Cali Creative Duo Tips. They are based in the UK, I believe. And it says here, Manuscript Pen Company Limited, Highley in Shropshire. So this is the sort of thing that you can do with these, because they have a chisel tip, which is not like your normal alcohol marker chisel tip. It is different. I'll get one out here. It's got a fine point on one side, a very, very fine point. And the other side has this rather strange looking flat tip to it. But because it has a flat tip, it enables you to get the thick line and the thin line, because it will do both with the same nib. Now the advantage of this pen in particular, and it's got about, depending on which end you're looking at, it's a 9.3 or 9.5 millimeter barrel. The nice thing about this is you can put it into your cutting machine if you have a pen holder, and you can use it to write. And what you do is you put it in at whichever angle you decide you want. So you either put it at 6 to 12 or 1 to 7 or whatever, and you can do your writing with that. And also you can, of course, do your normal writing by hand if you want to. So yeah, a good little kit there, which doesn't cost the earth, just to start you off. Maybe as a present for someone, it's a nice little stocking filler. My next tip involves tubes of paint. I've got a set of paints here, which are, again, as it happens, from Arteza. These are gouache colours, so they are basically water-soluble paints, but they are opaque. And they're in tubes, as you can see. Now, tube paints are great, very usable. I like having a tube paint simply because if I want to do background blending on a card, for example, I can simply get one of these brushes, make it damp, literally just tap it to the paint tube and then blend. It's as easy as that. The downside of tubes of paint is when you can't get the lid off. Now, when I got these, I did a review of them, so I didn't do what I normally do, which is as soon as I get a tube of paint, I undo the lid, I make sure it's clean around the thread, and then I put some Vaseline around the thread. Now, this means that when I go to use it, maybe months later, in some cases, depending on the colour, I can still get the lid off without wrecking the tube. So yesterday, I spent about an hour and a half doing that to every single tube of paint in there. I would prefer not to have had to do that, because one of the reasons it took so long is because I had to clean everything off first and then do it. But if you're going to be cleaning off the tubes of paints, I recommend getting a small, fairly rough cloth to do it, and warm water. Rinse your cloth in the warm water, wring it till it's almost dry, and then just twist it around the threads. That will get off the majority of the paint. I did try doing it with a toothbrush, but that was really messy and not a very clever idea. And my other tip is, when you're doing it, wear an apron. So when you've done that, I advise doing colour swatches, and I did all these, and then I laminate them. So they have the names on, they're in colour segments, the same ones that they were in the box when I bought the paints, and they're laminated so they'll keep nice and clean even if I mess them up. This tip is about watercolour brush pens, or the equivalents. In here I have a variety of different watercolour brush pens. Some are designed for writing, so these are very fine tip, and they're great for fine detail. These are touch ones, and they're by Pentel. I have some in here that are by Chromatech, and these are very nice. You can buy those in sets. I have some here which are from Lidl, and these are really good. They are fine point on one end and a thicker tip on the other. Perfectly usable. And I think I have some other ones there. Oh yes, these are koi colouring brush pens, which I also like. Now, whatever ones you want to buy depends really on your personal preference on brush tips. And of that, I really can't advise, just that if you do very small detailed stuff, have a smaller brush tip. If you're doing larger stuff, then go for a fatter one. However, There is an alternative to these which you may not have considered, which also works extremely well. And that is this sort of thing. I have some Carioca, you can get Crayola ones. I've got some from all sorts of places. And these are basically child's washable felt tips. Now the reason the washable bit is important is because it indicates that they are completely water-based. So you have a chunkier tip on these, and this is a dual end one, so you get a different colour on the other side. I have some that are all one colour. These are Carioca ones, fine point on that side, chunky one on that side, because they are water-based pens. They do the same kind of thing as the adult versions do, but they are very cheap. And if it's something that you just want to try out, or maybe you just want to buy a stocking filler for someone and just have them be able to have lots and lots and lots of different colours, because you can get these in sets of 72 or something, or 100 odd, then this is something you might want to consider. Particularly if it is someone who hasn't tried it before, doesn't really know if they're going to get on with it, and you don't want to spend an absolute fortune, or they don't want to spend an absolute fortune, or you don't want to spend a fortune yourself for something you don't know if you're going to use. So there are lots and lots of alternatives. When you're buying these things, the best thing that you can spend your money on is actually the paper, because you do need watercolor paper to make this work, and you want decent watercolor paper. So you want to buy the best paper that you can buy for your particular use, depending on what that might be. Now there are basically two types of watercolor paper that are commonly sold. There is hot press and there is cold press. This is an example of cold press watercolor paper. It has texture to it. It looks quite creamy, but you can get it in bright white as well. But it has texture. It is not completely flat. This is a hot press paper, and it is a lot smoother. It feels more like a really heavyweight quality card, but it is designed for watercolor. Now the reason you need to have watercolor paper is because of the water, basically. If you're using anything other than watercolor paper for watercolor, you're going to have a very hard time of things. If you're going to be doing anything with watercolor pens like this, you might also want to consider having a nice china palette. It's only got a few spaces because, generally speaking, on small projects you're not using lots and lots and lots of different colors, and you can get bigger ones if you like, but you probably don't need it. You can use just a plain white tile, but if you want to do anything more than a brush full or two of colour, then you may find a tile's not so good because your colours might run into each other unintentionally. If you're not in the habit of choosing artist brushes, you might want to consider these. These are water brushes. The reason I recommend these is because they make it so easy for someone to do small items of artwork without having a lot of equipment on the table, without having large quantities of water and stuff. It's just a convenient thing to do, and it's an easy starting point. Bring it a bit closer. So you can add some colour. You can choose to put different colours down in one go or not, as the case may be. You can do whatever you feel like doing. But then you come in with a brush and you soften that colour out. The water dissolves it and you get a graduated wash. There you go. No skill required, it will just gradually dilute it. Now you can come in with different colours if you want to. So I could put some there. But with these pens, what you don't do is draw, or paint I should say, on a wet surface. They go down on a dry surface, and then you add the water to it to change the depth of colour. So that's with a fine one, you see. You can get a very, very fine line. If I'm going in with the thicker tip, it puts out more water. At least it will when it's got some coming out at all. Yeah, there we go. Puts out more water and will spread it much more rapidly. Okay, so if you don't like the basic colour that you have put down, or you want to change the colour, you want to intensify it, this is where your palette comes in, because you simply put some colour down on your palette and then pick it up with your brush and you drop it in. So you can do wet on wet, you can do different areas of different colours, whatever you want to do. You could add a completely different colour. I'm going to use a completely different manufacturer of pen. Just put some down there just to show you that it works in exactly the same way. Pick up the colour and I'm going to drop that in. And it will spread and go wherever the water goes. Basically, it's only going to stop when the water is dried up. If you want to take colour out, you can make it wet and you can blot colour out. You can do all sorts of nice effects by doing that. So that's how those actually work. And these, oops, undid the thing. These cheap and cheerful pens work in the same way. Let me just find some reasonably good colours. Okay. So these obviously have got a much thicker tip, but the fine point comes if you use it on the tip, and then you use it on the side if you want something that is wider. Take the brush and again it is going to spread the colour. Excuse the greying here. My normal pencil for drawing has lost its lead and I need to replace it. And this is charcoal, which is not ideally suited for this kind of thing. So if I want to go in with the red, I can put some red down here, like that. Pick up the red and put some red in. If I want to pick up some of the other green, I can do that as well. Yeah, it really doesn't matter which variety of these things you are using. The only difference is going to be the colour selection. Okay. You know, you can get so many different colours in water-based felt tips. It really, really doesn't matter a great deal if all you are doing is card making and art for your own purpose. If you are doing art for selling, then obviously you need to make sure that whatever you're buying is archival. But if you're not, are you really that worried? The answer for me is no, I'm not. And to buy something like this would be an awful lot cheaper than buying the equivalent in the artistic version for things like Chromatech or Arteza or any other brand of watercolor pen. You may wonder why I'm showing you a bottle. It has water in it, nothing special about it at all, but it's handy to have it in this format in the craft room so that when I want a little amount of water to dilute something, I've got it on hand. I don't need to go to the bathroom, get a cup or whatever and fill it up. I keep this in the craft room. I fill up my water pens. I use it if I'm painting, whatever. It's just handy to have around. These are actually airbrush paints, but I'm not talking about necessarily using them in an airbrush. This is absolutely gorgeous. Look at that. And this is created with airbrush paints. Now the reason I mention these is because I have some which are by Vallejo, and they are, what are they called? Let me see. They are called the shifters. They are eccentric colours. That's what they like to call them. This particular one is pearl violet, and I know it looks like it's white, but it's a type of paint that changes colour depending on the light source, and this makes it absolutely magical when you want to do stuff on a dark background. They do work a little bit on a pale background, but not as much. Some colours more than others. But on a dark background, wow, they really do pop. Now the advantage of these for general artistic purpose is that they come in a small bottle, so you don't have to store huge tubs and bottles of things. They are relatively cheap to buy, and on top of that, they are the right consistency for flicking or for using straight out of the bottle pretty much to jazz up any artwork that you're doing if you want to add a little bit of colour changing. So the consistency of these is like milk. That's what makes it good for airbrushing, and it's what makes it usable directly out of the bottle if you want a thinner paint. Now I have a selection of colours of these, but they are really, really pretty, as you can see, and that isn't even under strong light. It's very dull here today. We've got thunderstorms and rain. This is another example of their use. This was done on an airbrush with a stencil, and you may be able to see the colour changing on that. I don't know if the camera picks it up too well, but it's really, really pretty. Now if you want to do something like this on a cup or a mug and you want it to stay there, you're going to need to do something to help it. If you're just planning on hand washing it, you might get away with it, but with airbrushing, because the coat of paint is so thin, it still might not be the best thing to do. But you can coat it with something to make it stay on. And if you do that, it will even be dishwasher safe. This is Cadence Porcelain and Napkin Medium. And according to the bottle, once it's on and dried, you bake it at 130 degrees Celsius, and it then becomes dishwasher proof. Now I painted it over here just with a brush, and it's thick enough that you do see brush lines. But if you wanted to avoid that, there is a way around it. If when you made your stencil, instead of just making one hole for a dot, if you made a offset of that, say a 1mm offset, and then when you read it, you take out only the smallest hole first of all, do your painting, and then remove the extra bit of vinyl that is this 1mm offset, you could then paint it with this, and I doubt very much whether you'd even notice it, but it would protect everything underneath it. So that is a viable alternative if you want to get some really nice brushed mugs. If you like things like this that shimmer and sparkle, and you want to do whole pieces of paper and all the rest of it with this, then you might decide that it's worthwhile getting some of this type of thing. This is old. I must have had it for about 10 years. It's still going strong. Reeves Iridescent Medium. It's an acrylic medium, and when you open it up, it actually looks like it's pearly white, and it is very iridescent. So what I do is I put a little amount of it in the bottom of a bottle and I top it up with water, and it looks like milk, but you shake it up really, really well. Now this happens to be embroidery backing, machine embroidery backing. It's not the soluble type. That would defeat the object. And what I do is I put colour on it, or I use it to clean up a work surface when I've been painting. And then I slosh this on top of it and I screw it up and I let it dry. When it's dry, I can iron it if I want to. I do tend to use a cloth over the top just in case any paint comes off on the iron. You don't really want that. So you can iron it to it's really flat, or if you like the crinkle look, you can just use one of these little travel irons that doesn't get quite as hot, and it will make absolutely wonderful flowers and decorations and things to cut out, depending on what colour you're doing it, of course. And it cuts really well, this stuff. But this adds such a beautiful sparkle, and it costs you next to nothing. If you're painting normally, you can just use this instead of water, and you pick it up with your brush in the same way and you'll have pearlized paints. You know, it's so good value, it's incredible. You can do something similar with Mica Powders, but you will probably need to add an acrylic medium to it in order for it to stay on anything. Because Mica Powders by themselves don't have the binders, you will need to add a binder to the water. It's not difficult. You can use a cheap glue and, you know, just put some of that in a bottle along with your water. You could use a normal acrylic medium and shake it all up, add that. But you would have to add something if you're just using a straightforward mica powder. This piece here looks like it was delicately done with watercolour, doesn't it? But it wasn't. It was actually done with food dyes designed for airbrushing cakes. If you happen to have a crossover hobby like that, you may not need to buy any watercolours. I topped it off by using some of my sparkle water, and all I did with this was dilute the food colouring a little bit first, drop it onto wet watercolour paper, and then build up some layers. It's really pretty. Didn't take much effort, and it just looks really good. Now, one of my tips for watercolour, if you're going to be doing something like this where you need to get something really wet, is to start off with your watercolour paper wet on the wrong side. So you want to make sure this side is as wet as you are going to get this side. Put your wet side down on a non-absorbent surface. A glass worktop saver like I use is ideal. Make this side really wet, and what you'll find is that it will stick to the surface and it'll stay there quite happily without wrinkling up until you have finished doing your background. It's an excellent way of avoiding having to use masking tape. When it dries, it will dry relatively flat, but if you need it to be absolutely and totally flat, just put something heavy on it overnight and it'll be fine. Or if you're really stuck, you can put a piece of paper over it and you can iron it. No problem doing that whatsoever, as long as you don't have the iron too hot. This is actually done, although in the watercolour style, with these chalk pastels. This set came from Lidl. What you can do with those is you can use a craft knife, scrape colour over to your surface, and then saturate it with water and play around with it. You might want to use a brush on it, you might not. You might want to use a sponge on it, you might not. If you want any really fine lines, you can go in with a fine-tipped pen and put those in. You can spritz it with alcohol afterwards. You can put shiny water on it. The dots here are created by putting alcohol in when it's still wet. Here's another one in a different colorway, and here's another one where these darker lines were actually drawn in by the chalk pastel itself and just softened out with the water when the rest of it was done. So you can have lots and lots of fun with all sorts of different things to make your colours go further. And what you use is a matter of personal choice, but you really don't need to have every art supply on the market in every colour available. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon. Take care now. Bye bye.